My name is Roney, and this is the Technical Games Model Speedminton Session Report from the Share the Wealth Physical Education Conference from January of 2022. Share the Wealth is an international physical education conference that is held in Jekyll Island, Georgia annually by Georgia Health and Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance Committee, or GAFERD for short. This is recognized as one of the best K-12 practitioner conferences in the country because many educators and professionals can come and present activity and lecture sessions based on a wide variety of things. It could be things about certain games or physical activity lessons, or you can have lecture sessions about certain topics that relate to school systems and school programs. The presenters of the Technical Games Model Speedminton session were Dr. Tony Pritchard, who is an Associate Professor of Pedagogy at Georgia Southern University, Dr. Starla McCullum, who is a Professor of Health and Kinesiology at Georgia Southern University, and Dr. Kelly Penix, who is a Senior Lecturer of Health and Physical Education, also at Georgia Southern University. So these three individuals were the ones who presented the idea of the tactical games model. They presented the activity of Speedminton. They also were the ones who held the demonstrations of various things that work within the model and the activity for that session. All three professors are very distinguished at their university, and they have also all been part of various research that has to do with various teaching models, such as the personalized system of instruction with weight training, and also the sport education tactical models. So these three have done extensive research in various other teaching models, as well as presenting and teaching the tactical games model to their own students at the university. Purpose and goals of the tactical games model. Students can learn game strategies with an emphasis on skill development with this model, as the strategies and the skill are particular to each sport. So you're relying heavily on practice tasks and modified gameplay for students to learn the content. The skills and strategies taught through this model can be applied to various sports and games that help the transfer of learning from one sport to another. So if you're not familiar with the transfer of learning concept, this is a concept of somebody learning a certain activity or a skill that can be applied to other things. So let's take basketball and ultimate frisbee, for example. So in basketball, you are performing certain things such as cuts and movements. Those can also be applied to ultimate frisbee. So let's say you are teaching the L cut in basketball for an offensive player who does not have the ball to receive it. They would perform the L cut and get away from their opponent. This same principle can be used for ultimate frisbee. So the offensive player who is without the frisbee is trying to get away from their opponent, and they perform the same L cut just like in basketball. The transfer of learning is transferring the knowledge of one skill across various platforms and sports. Also, improvement of overall game performance and knowledge is a goal for the tactical games model. So, as stated earlier, there are things called modified games, and so this is designed for students to get an idea of how certain games are played, but in a modified sense. So this way, every student has an opportunity to learn and participate, and not just play big games, such as 5-on-5 basketball. So to modify the 5-on-5 basketball, you would have 3v3 basketball. And the other people on the teams that are within the activity, they will be the referees, statisticians, scorekeepers, things like that. And then you rotate those students in to play to gameplay, and the people who were playing, they get rotated out to the referees and scorekeepers. And that's halfway during the modified game session. So that's helping students on the cognitive side of understanding gameplay and the knowledge of certain things such as like referee signals and what equates to a foul and what students should and shouldn't be doing in certain activities. So this model is a great way to get students engaged in that sense, where they have an understanding of game performance and knowledge in that way. The way this session was set up was the presenters being Dr. Tony Pritchard, Dr. Starla McCollum, and Dr. Kelly Penix would explain the tactical games model, what exactly it was, and why they implement it into their curriculum when they are teaching aspiring educators at the collegiate level. Once they explained what the tactical games model was, they transitioned into the sport, which was Speedminton, and exactly what that sport was and how it fits into this specific teaching model. Once they did the explanation, they had an active demonstration of the modified game and practice task of Speedminton. So the modified game and practice task all fit into a designed lesson. So they had the demonstration would be various people out into the crowd. They would come out, and the presenters would have the area set up for them to just go ahead and participate. So they would present the skill and the practice task, and the demonstrators would have to perform it. So this is showing everyone how the tactical games model works and what it looks like in case they want to implement it themselves into their own curriculum. Towards the end, the presenters started to wrap things up and have a review and a question and answer session. So they reviewed what the tactical games model was, how it works, how it can be implemented into grades 6 through 12. And even though it's used at the collegiate level from the professors, you can still implement it into your own curriculum from middle and high school. So they also hosted a question and answer session for people who had anything they wanted to ask related to the sport and the activity and demonstration sessions. So let's talk about an outline of a tactical games model lesson. So the way this model is designed, each lesson will start off with the first modified game. So the modified game is from the specific sport. So let's say it's Speedminton in this case. It would be a modified game of Speedminton between students in a class. You would let this run for around 6 or 7 minutes, and then the teacher would blow their whistle or get the activity to stop, and then they would bring their students close to them for a set induction. So the modified game is basically just playing the game any way that they know how. Okay, so we're not necessarily introducing certain skills just yet. That will be set up later for the second modified game. So for the set induction time, this will be a quick and brief question and answer session that engages students with the material for that day. So you're asking specific sport related questions and you're allowing them to answer it. So you're not giving away the answer immediately. This is designed to see where the students' cognitive levels are at, in particular to your sport. Right after that, you would present the specific skill that will be learned that day, and then you would go ahead and set up the demonstration for that task. After the demonstration is done, you would transition into task number 1, which is the task or the skill that you are going to teach for that day. You would explain and demonstrate the skill, and then students would have a set amount of time to practice that skill with their group or partners. Continuing on with the outline of the tactical games model lesson, after you have the students practice the task for a few minutes, you can implement progressions, which are things such as extensions and challenges. So extensions of the skill are designed to make the activity harder or easier for students. So let's say you are playing pickleball and you have students close up to the net at first with the skill that they're performing. You can back those students up by 2 or 3 steps, and then that makes it harder for them to try to get the ball over the net. So another thing are challenges. So challenges are for students to participate in designed activities to see how well they can perform the skill and task within designated scenarios. So let's say you added a challenge to see how many times the partners could hit the speeder within Speedminton back and forth without hitting it out of the designated zone within 1 minute, or until the teacher stops the activity. Those would be challenges that the students can participate in. And this is an extension of task number 1. So you're still utilizing that skill, but just in a different way. So once that is over, the teacher will determine how much time they will have for that activity, and then they will transition into the second modified game. So I mentioned with the first modified game that you're not really introducing any skill into the first modified game, but this time you are. So modified gameplay of the sport this time, but you are implementing the skill and the tactic taught during that lesson. So if you taught the forehand stroke in pickleball that lesson, then the second modified game, you're getting the students to use the forehand stroke in that activity. So you can add an incentive, like if you use the forehand stroke and you successfully score off of your opponent, you get 3 points instead of 2, which would be the normal points that they would have. This is just a way to get them to utilize the skill and to remember to utilize the skill and tactic that was taught during that lesson. So that second modified game is important. And following that, you have the lesson closure, which is you as the educator or teacher checking for understanding of the skill cues that were taught during the lesson, and also a recap of the lesson as a whole. So these are the main emphasis points of the outline of a tactical games model lesson. How is learning differentiated through this model? Well, learning is differentiated in various ways, such as intertask variation and intratask variation. Intertask variation is an invitation for the whole class to make a change. So this will be an example of extensions or challenges. So if you're wanting the whole class to take 2 steps back when you're performing an activity, this would be intertask. Intratask is inviting just an individual to make a change. So if a student is struggling with something, you can change the environment or the equipment or activity for them. So this would be an example of moving a student during pickleball closer to the net when they're struggling to perform the forehand stroke. So these are 2 of the major ways that learning is differentiated through the tactical games model. Why is Speedminton an effective sport to use with the tactical games model? Well, there's a transfer of learning through many racket sports, such as badminton and tennis, as those correlate very similarly with the sport of speedminton. Also, speedminton is a sport that can be played indoors and outdoors, so this gives the teacher the option to change the environment of learning when there's not enough space in the gym, which is inside, or they can move the class inside if they had been practicing outside as needed. So what grade levels are targeted with this activity and model? Well, the tactical games model has been found to be effective from grade number 3 all the way up to college level courses. However, it depends on certain activities or sports on the grade level that you can use. So this particular session at the Share the Wealth conference focused on implementing the sport of speedminton only through grades 6 through 12, which was middle school and high school, due to the nature of the skills and tactics that were being taught. However, as I said just a second ago, this model can be used in elementary school with grades 3 through 5 all the way up to college level courses. It just really depends on the activity and the content that you are teaching. Some key points to take away from the Tactical Games session report are that the skills and strategies that are taught through this model can be applied to various sports and games that help the transfer of learning from one sport to another. Learning is differentiated mainly through two different ways, such as intertask and intratask variations, with intertask being a whole class invitation to make a change, and an intratask variation being an individual invitation to making a change. The tactical games model is proven to be effective from grades 3 on up to the college level courses. However, as stated earlier, it just depends on what type of content you are teaching to your classes. And the improvement of overall gameplay, performance, and knowledge is one of the major purposes and goals of the Technical Games model. So I hope you found this session report insightful, and hopefully if you are thinking of implementing the Technical Games model, this helped shed some light on how it can be implemented and some ways it can be effective.